Hey guys, welcome back to another video from Shadesky TV. In this video, I'm going to talk about how to build a strategy around your stock investments for it to help you create long-term wealth. So what most people think about when they think about buying stocks or investing is that they automatically think about risk, gambling, speculating, or high risk, high reward. But that is far from the truth unless you don't know what you're doing. And most people who have never bought stocks before don't understand about the stock market as much as they need to. So if you're new to investing, I hope this video will open the doors for you to see some of the great opportunities that the stock market has to offer and really help you build that long-term wealth. I don't know about you guys, but I grew up hearing that stocks are bad for you. My parents lost a huge chunk of their money during the 2008 financial crisis and also later on with some poor investment choices. I definitely see where they've come from, and it's definitely painful for anyone to see their hard-earned money just disappear like that. However, although I grew up hearing that stocks are bad for you, I still strongly believe that the stock market is a great vehicle for creating long-term wealth if you know what you're doing and make smart risk-based decisions.
I'd like to begin with the reason why everyone needs to learn or at least be aware of the importance of investing. For a person whose income ties closely with productivity, as shown on this graph, the income potential along with productivity increases as you age towards and also past 20 years old. Then it hits a peak somewhere around 40 years old. And afterwards, it declines quickly as the person no longer have the energy to work. And somewhere past 50 years old, income crosses with productivity, and that is the typical point of retirement.
This is very important to know because although you might be very young currently, there will be a time in the future where you no longer have the energy to be productive. So let's face it, even for the average employee, there's still some risks of getting fired or getting let go regardless of how hard you're working.
What's even more concerning is that there's currently a gap between productivity and compensation. On this chart, productivity is represented by output divided by labor input for all American earners. From 1948 to 1973, productivity has been very closely aligned with workers' compensation. However, since 1973, compensation has not been catching up with the level of productivity, and this is known as a productivity pay gap. What can we do about all of this?
Let's not be saddened by this reality. The next chart I want to show you guys is the rich people's chart, where income has nothing to do with productivity. In other words, income is independent of the energy and time you need to contribute, which is exactly the idea of having money working for you.
On the rich people's chart, income continues to increase into perpetuity even past the point of retirement. Income can either be a straight line or it can be an exponential line if investment gains are reinvested. And something interesting to note here is that the point of retirement is moved to a much younger age. And like mentioned before, productivity does not drive the income. Therefore, in the rich people's chart, not only is your money working for you, but you can also reach retirement much earlier on.
I don't know about you guys, but I definitely want to be laying on a beach or traveling across the world or simply just do anything I want when money is not a constraint. And even if you love your job right now, which I totally understand, it's still a good idea to achieve that financial freedom earlier on in case something changes in the future. Now, there's something missing from those two charts I just showed you guys. Can you guys guess what it is? That's right, it's expenses. Expenses can be very hard to predict because no one is really certain about what the future holds. And expenses can include things like rent increases, inflation, interest rates, taxes, or in some cases, medical expenses. And expenses can dictate how much time it will take you to reach that goal of financial freedom. So the more control you have on your expenses, the faster and easier it will take you to reach that goal. Now that we're through with the why, let's go to the fun part on building a strategy. Now, it is true that with any type of investment, there comes with risk. But us as individual investors should make smart decisions on putting those risks in an area where we have a comparative advantage. Now, let's unpack the words comparative advantage. In the corporate world, businesses make decisions around the clock all the time on decisions such as mergers, acquisitions, where to invest their cash, or how much dividends to pay to their investors. All these financial decisions that involves moving capital involves risk. And a good decision is to always place those risks in an area that aligns with the company's core competency. So in other words, comparative advantage is essentially when faced with many options, which option is the best that leverages your distinct core competency. For individual investors like you and I, we need to think about our personal finances like owning a business. Therefore, it's actually more financially responsible to take calculated risks in order for your business to grow. Now let's look at an example where Shaysky is making a decision amongst two choices. And for this example, let's focus on the risk aspect of these options.
The first choice is purchasing a race car for $200,000. Now, a car is considered either a liability, an expense, an asset, or an investment depending what the person is using it for and what situation the person is in. In this example, imagine Shaysky doesn't have the cash to pay in full and she can only pay a 10% down and finance the rest of it at a 2% interest rate. If her entire net worth is only $20,000 in cash, that means she will be taking on debt, which is liability, and there are risks associated with that liability, meaning if she loses her income stream, she cannot make the monthly car payments and will be in deep trouble. So taking on this option is taking risks in an area where she does not have a comparative advantage. Now, if Shaysky is a professional race car driver, or if she's using this car to make a movie, then suddenly there will be a much higher comparative advantage because then this car will be an investment as it can drive long-term value for her. The second choice is buying company stocks such as consumer brands like Nike, McDonald's, Apple, Starbucks, and so on. Without even diving into the stock fundamentals, Shaysky grew up knowing these brands and is very familiar with their products and business models. Although there are risks associated in buying these stocks, these companies are something that Shaysky is already familiar with as a consumer. Therefore, she has a relatively higher comparative advantage placing the risks on these companies than the previous choice of a race car.
When investing in companies with a business-to-consumer business model, also known as B2C, you as the consumer should already be familiar with how well a brand is performing or how awful a brand is performing. Those companies I mentioned earlier are very well known worldwide and they're very established brands so that they have a lot of brand power. Now, if this was a company decision, would you have invested in Shaysky if she has made the decision on the first option? Would you have invested in her if she has made no decisions at all? Let me know in the comments below what you think and we can all learn from each other. And the reason why I brought that example up because it's very similar to real-world business decisions. Comparative advantage boils down to a few things. Number one, it is experience and knowledge for a given company or industry. This is why paying yourself first is very important because it will just expand on that knowledge base. It's important to understand the company's financial fundamentals for the companies that you're investing in. And this is exactly what I'll be doing in my videos is to help everyone expand their knowledge base for you to get a higher comparative advantage in the market. So if you haven't already, make sure to drop a like and subscribe to my channel to learn more about personal finances, stocks, or investments. Now let's jump into number two, which is the time your money can be placed into the stock market. Now, if you're able to set aside a certain percentage of your money or a certain amount of your money into the stock market, and you don't need that money for the short term, that money has a longer period to incubate and generate higher and higher gains, and it can also withstand some short-term market volatility. Now, if you're currently young and working, you always have a higher advantage over your older self because time for you is the greatest asset and allows you to take on more risks. Number three is the amount of money that you can invest. Now, I personally don't think that you should be putting 100% of your net worth into the stock market, but the idea is that the more that you can invest, the more money you can make. And I will make a video in the future of how much a person should be putting into the stock market based upon the strategies that we're discussing today. Number four is your job stability. And you know better than anyone about your specific industry, about your company's financial health, about the value that you bring to your job and your team. The idea is that the more stable your job is or the more control you have, the higher percentage of your income that you can contribute to your investment portfolio. Number five is the country that you're currently living in. I don't know where you guys are watching this from. For myself, I'm currently living in the States. I've been here for 3 years now. I was actually born in China and moved to Canada when I was very young. So if you're watching this in North America, consider yourself very lucky because you automatically have a higher advantage over anyone else in the world. And from a stock market perspective, the US have generated a historical annual return of 10%. And it is more consistent than any other country in the world. So for myself, over 90% of my stock investments are in US stocks, and I believe it will continue to increase in value over time. So if you look at the China stock market, it is way less consistent than the States because most of the return on investment is in the real estate market. However, there is high barrier to entry to the real estate market because the housing prices have been really high in China. Lastly, it's understanding your personality, and this could be the most important factor of all. Understanding your personality means whether you can be patient, whether you can withstand a large drop in the market, whether you're brave enough to take opportunities when the market is falling. So if you understand your personality very well, this could be a good core competency, and you can choose your strategy based on this competency. I believe everyone has their own distinct comparative advantage, and this is what makes investing so fun. And in the future, I will make investment videos based upon some of the combinations of these comparative advantages that we talked about today.
I believe the basic framework for investment strategy should look something like this, where you have relatively smaller percentage of high-risk investments at the top and relatively larger percentage of low risk at the bottom. The type of the investments that goes into these categories is exactly based on what we talked about earlier, and you guessed it, comparative advantage. This is why for some of you, a high-risk investment could be cryptocurrency or stocks like Snowflake or Workhorse, if and only if you understand it and believe it's an investment. In this category, you want the probability of making profit at least equivalent and higher than gambling, regardless of what comparative advantage you have. For others, this high-risk bucket could be individual stocks like Tesla or even Facebook or Amazon. For high-risk investments, you should expect a much higher return on losses compared to other buckets. However, if you consistently underperform your other buckets, rethink on the decisions. Same thing on the low-risk side. Some of you might choose blue-chip companies, index funds, or some of you might choose bonds. The investment type should always be changing as your comparative advantage changes. If you're getting older and holding everything else equal, you should be thinking about putting money into a different type of low-risk investments. For myself, because I'm young and have a good combination of comparative advantage, my strategy has been focusing close to 100% of my investments into what I consider to be the high risk to medium risk category, and I plan to build on my low risk bucket when I'm older. I think it's important to have focus while I'm young so I'm not wasting this advantage. I also want to show you guys that times are changing. The top 5 companies in 2010 is no longer the top 5 in 2020. If we visualize the 200 years of US stock market history, finance used to be a huge player in the 1800s, followed by transports in the mid to late 1890s. And now at the time of this video, the market is currently dominated by large tech companies.
Because times are changing, we must always be ready to adapt to these changes and keep our eyes on the horizon and constantly think about the long term. Which industry do you think will be the next to thrive in the next decade? Leave a comment below, let me know what you think, and we can all learn from each other. And lastly, if you like this video or if you learned something new, make sure to hit the subscribe and like button so more people can see and learn from this video. Finally, don't forget to have fun and enjoy life while embarking on this exciting journey to financial freedom.